Hi everyone. In a world overflowing with information, our attention has become the most sought-after currency. AI algorithms choose which of the vast ocean of messages will be shown to us, subtly shaping our perceptions and interactions. These algorithms trade our attention for profit, which means their intent is not fully aligned with our own. What cost does this influence incur on our collective ability to communicate and our mental well-being? Keep watching to learn more. This video has 3 parts: defining attention, the attention economy, and changing the optimization target. Part 1, defining attention. Let's start by trying to define attention as humans experience it. Attention is basically our conscious focus. Where are we looking? What are we thinking about right now? Our attention can be all over the place, or it can be focused on one specific task. There's an interesting book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. He's a computer science professor, and he really likes to emphasize focusing on one task at once. He's a big advocate of putting distractions aside and focusing on a task for a long period of time. He also talks about the value of the task that you're spending your attention on. The more people that can do that task, the less valuable it is, which is why he considers social media to be kind of at the bottom of the pyramid in terms of where you can be spending your time. And learning difficult things or solving problems for people would be higher up on the pyramid. For me personally, I know that concentration is one of my best skills. My ability to focus and spend a lot of attention on one topic at a time, even if it's not that interesting or seems boring to other people, allows me to learn things in depth. For everybody, we pay more attention to something that is novel, that seems really new, or familiar in some way, like a show whose characters we already know. So you'll see ads, for example, that are trying to get your attention will often be novel or familiar. The other great way to sustain attention is through storytelling. A good story allows the listener to put themselves in another's place and experience what it would be like to be that person without any danger that would come from experiencing it in real life. That's good practice for survival, so your brain likes to pay attention to stories as well. In the context of communication and the internet, attention is scarcity. People say we're in an information economy, but information isn't the scarce resource. There's so much information just a Google search away. The actual limited resource is human attention, because we can only pay attention to one thing at once, or a small handful of things at once if you're skilled at multitasking. We know that the human attention span is shrinking over time because of technology and access to instant gratification. And even the English language supports this view. We say that you pay attention. And the word pay implies that you have to give up something. You're giving away something of value, and that you have a limited supply of it. So in the information economy, attention is what we have. It's the one thing that's actually valuable, but we don't really think of it that way. So we'll talk a lot more about that in the rest of this video. I do want to mention as well what happens when you're not paying attention, and not in a bad way. I mean, if you're kind of just vegetating and not thinking of anything in particular, or maybe you're trying to fall asleep or trying to rest, when you're not consciously focusing on something, your brain enters what's called default mode, which enables non-conscious processing. It's actually a very creative mode, and you're great at problem solving when you're doing that, when you're thinking about a problem without actually thinking about it. It's one reason people say that if you're encountering a really difficult problem, you should just take a break from it, go for a walk, or go have a shower or something, come back, and everything might seem clearer, because your brain has been working on solving that problem with its default mode when you're not consciously focusing on a difficult task. So why do we have to pay attention? Why do we have to give up something in order to enable conscious processing? Well, the reason is that your brain actually uses energy, and consciousness uses quite a lot more energy than other functions of your brain. And your body doesn't want to waste energy if it doesn't have to. Let's take exercising, for example. Why is it healthy to exercise? Why do we have to exercise? It's because your body doesn't waste time and energy maintaining muscle mass that is never used. It's more efficient for your body in terms of number of calories consumed to let your arm muscles waste away if you never lift anything heavy. So spending time learning something, focusing your attention, is similar to exercising. It might feel difficult and annoying, but you'll definitely do it if you need to survive, because what helps you survive are things that catch your interest, things that are novel or familiar or seem really important to your safety. That's why media has to be really interesting if it's to hold people's attention, because otherwise their body says, why are you doing this? Why are you paying attention to this media when you could just be sleeping or whatever? So actually, this notion of having limited attention is somewhat a byproduct of our biology. Since I drew the comparison to exercise, if you continuously pay attention to things, is that going to make you better at paying attention? In short, yes. Like that book, Deep Work. If we get distracted from a task, we spend on average 23 minutes doing other things, like procrastinating, before we return to the original task. But if you develop concentration as a skill, then that gives you the willpower to focus on something for long periods. Pay more attention, so to speak, but your body has learned that it's actually valuable for you to do that. Part 2, the attention economy. This is anecdotal, but supposedly Isaac Newton knew almost everything there was to know, all the knowledge that the human race possessed at that time. Now, of course, there's far too much information for one person to ever hope to process. We can't even process all the information that's related to us, so we rely on recommendation algorithms and AI to filter out the most relevant and interesting things for us to spend our attention on. That's all well and good, but what are the true intentions of these AI algorithms? Because having control over what humans see is an immense power. So let's talk about how social media works. Social media relies on lots of people posting content all the time and then uses some kind of connection friend graph or history of your likes and so on to pick a bunch of messages from the ether and present them to you in a specific order. In theory, you can spend as much or as little time as you like reading these messages in the order that the AI has presented them and still get value out of it. People have lots of reasons for participating in social networks. Probably the most common is to keep up with acquaintances or fear of missing out because all your friends are there and you don't want to miss anything. People use social networks to learn what their friends or acquaintances are thinking, are saying. So indirectly, people use it to get news because that's what this person over here is talking about and you read it. So now you have received that news sort of secondhand. And people use social media to follow public figures. And the interesting thing about social media is that the line is really blurry. Who is a public figure? Answer: everyone could become a public figure. And that's the draw of it, really. It's a really amazing business model to be one of these platforms on which people are exchanging information. It's a great responsibility. You should be trying to prevent harmful information from spreading, but it is also an extremely viral and sticky product. Any type of communication endeavor might be created on the platform because it's going to be simpler than trying to start from scratch with email or something. I have a quote here from Cory Doctorow, who wrote Little Brother, which was probably my favorite book of all time when I was younger. If you're a young person that's really interested in technology, you should definitely check it out. But anyway, Cory Doctorow talks a lot about copyright and actually distributes most of his books online free of charge. You can just download them from his website. He just asks that if you like the book, that you eventually purchase a copy of it yourself. He said, quote, "The problem isn't piracy, it's obscurity." In other words, Cory Doctorow is prioritizing the right thing. He's saying, I need to get people's attention and then maybe money will follow, rather than saying, you must purchase my book and then hopefully you'll find it interesting. After all, it doesn't actually cost anything to distribute a book or other media online. Okay, that's all well and good, but how does social media really work on the inside? How do the algorithms work? This is where the story takes a darker turn. Of course, they're trying to maximize attention. They're trying to present you with information that will be most engaging, which sounds fine until I state it this way. They're trying to maximize the total amount of time that you're on the platform, maximize the total amount of consumption time, which generally goes against you having a balanced lifestyle. It's basically like addiction, right? They would prefer that you're addicted to their platform. Their goal is to keep you on the platform longer than you intended, and therefore they'll use all kinds of psychological, emotional manipulation to make sure you stay on the platform. And one of the most reliable ways to keep someone glued to the platform is to invoke really strong emotions in them. If I feel really upset, someone is wrong on the internet, then I'm much more likely to actually stay engaged and get into a really heated discussion or whatever. For example, let's say a social media platform has some number of posts that say something most people agree with, like, you should probably get vaccinated. Let's just suppose that that is a commonly held viewpoint. But then there's a small number of posts that say, vaccines are terrible, they make you sick. Okay, if most people agree with the original post, they're not going to engage with it. They're not going to feel the need to retweet and send it to their friends and post angry replies. But this controversial topic, vaccines are killing people, will generate all kinds of engagement. People will read it, they'll get annoyed, they'll repost it, and that actually fulfills the platform's goal, which is to keep you on the platform for a longer period of time. Okay, that's well and good, but now suppose you're somebody who has engaged angrily with one of these posts. Now the platform is just going to fill your feed with posts about why vaccines are terrible, because that got you to engage once, so maybe it will again. This has one of two effects. Either you'll get more and more enraged and polarized and say, no, vaccines are actually really good, what are you talking about? Or worse, you might eventually start to think, everybody's talking about this, which is selection bias, of course. The platform is showing you the people that are talking about this. You say, maybe everyone's talking about this because it's actually true. And you start to think about it and you start to do more searching and research, and the platform engages you with more and more extreme people talking about this topic. So you started with a topic that everybody generally agreed with and a fringe number of people saying this doesn't make any sense. Then the platform took people that were in the majority and forced them to become more polarized. Either they really doubled down on their original opinion, or they started to convert to the other, more contentious opinion. And that, in a nutshell, is how social media is impacting our perspectives, our politics, and our ability to communicate with each other. The social media platform is trying to optimize for maximum time on the platform. If you're spending part of that time really angry and engaged, that's good as far as the platform is concerned. And that push to get people more and more engaged forces people to different extremes and gives them the perspective that society is so divided and really forces them into tribes. That example about the vaccines, by the way, is a real example. It came from the book called The Chaos Machine. And the book talks about a former Facebook employee who actually had this happen to her. She started out in the majority thinking, yeah, vaccines are pretty reasonable. And then Facebook started sending her tons and tons of posts saying vaccines are actually terrible. And she really investigated to try to see what was happening. She engaged a little bit with some of these negative posts, and then Facebook just sent her only that. Here's a quote from that book, The Chaos Machine. Social media is a machine engineered to distort reality through the lens of tribal conflict and pull users towards extremes. I think that's a perfect description. And if you want to learn more about this, I highly suggest checking out that book, The Chaos Machine. You probably don't have to read all of it. Just a few examples are enough to get the point across, but it's really fascinating. And I'll talk a little bit more about examples from that book here. They talk about how the notorious 4chan is basically an attention economy, with anonymous users competing to do more and more outrageous things in the real world, with strong negative impacts like jokes and cons. Another example is the country of Myanmar, which I can locate on a map because I was recently planning a trip to Southeast Asia. So here you go. There's Myanmar. Facebook brought internet to the country in the sense that a bunch of people got access to Facebook but couldn't access the internet not through Facebook. Myanmar has several ethnic groups, I think at least 3, and what started happening was there was an increase in hate speech towards one of the minority ethnic groups. Facebook wasn't really monitoring the content of the messages, but pretty soon it led to riots and eventually even people getting killed. Tellingly, when Facebook shut down for brief periods, the riots and the killings stopped. But Facebook couldn't believe that their product was actually causing genocide, because unless you analyze it, it's natural to think that all you're doing is enabling communication more easily than would have otherwise happened. But because people had only Facebook and no other source of internet, information, news, they were stuck in this machine that was distorting reality and pushing them to extremes. Another word for this, by the way, is filter bubbles. That's not from the book, but from a TED Talk, which I'll also link in the description below. You could think of each person as having a digital filter around them that only lets through certain information. For example, the type of discourse that you enjoy and can engage with, especially the type of political discourse. So this pushing towards extremes and engendering enragement in users is really dangerous when it comes to political messaging, because for people deeply embedded in the attention economy, we elect political leaders that keep our attention, with the same caveats as the social media platform trying to keep your attention, trying to maximize your attention. Outrageous things, novelty, disruptions, all those keep your attention. They're not desirable, but they keep your attention. Part 3, changing the optimization target. The attention economy is actually very profitable. For example, Facebook currently makes more than $50 off of every user in the United States each quarter. That's $200 per year. So basically, you're converting hours and hours of your time into just $200, and you're not even the one who's receiving that money. Facebook is. Europe recently forced Facebook to offer a version without ads. So if you live in Europe, you can pay 10 to 13 euros per month, which is like $10 basically, and you can access a version of Facebook without ads. That doesn't actually really solve the problem though, because the same algorithm exists in Facebook showing you outrageous content. It just means that Facebook isn't profiting from it in the same way. An interesting example is the GDPR, which is a law that was introduced in Europe to protect consumer data and so on. When it was first introduced in 2018, a bunch of websites had to basically disable their ads in order to be shown in Europe because they didn't have an arrangement that was GDPR compatible at the time. So for example, the website of USA Today had a load time of about 9.8 seconds if you were loading the main version of the site that would be used in the US. But if you were accessing the site from the UK, it would take only 0.42 seconds to load. That's 23 times faster when you're just getting the content and not the ads along with the content. Plenty of other sites like The Verge and The Atlantic also did the same thing. No ads in Europe, ads for the rest of the world. These days, of course, most sites are just using advertisers that are compliant with GDPR so that they can still monetize their content when it's displayed in Europe. Because advertising is the one big monetization model that the internet uses. People hate paying for subscriptions. They'd rather have this free product, which, unbeknownst to them, is actually still making lots of money off of them and endangering how we communicate as well. How does the advertising ecosystem work? Well, advertisers are trying to show you relevant ads, which is their way of saying ads that you're more likely to click on. So it's actually the same optimization metric as the social media platforms themselves, pretty much. How do you maximize engagement? How do you maximize the likelihood someone will click? So advertisers collect as much data as possible about a user so that they can show you an ad that you're a tiny percentage point more likely to click on. And that's basically it. That's the scheme that powers the internet. The ads are placed by brands that are willing to pay some money just to increase their brand awareness. Most people don't actually purchase something right away when they see an ad. But if later you have a need for something, then recency bias, whatever you've seen a lot and recently will pop up into your mind and you'll go, maybe I'll buy that product. Or if you see all your friends getting it or whatever, all those things can lead to a successful conversion. Here's the thing though, you can optimize for any variable you like when it comes to communication infrastructure. Instead of optimizing for maximum time of engagement, regardless of whether you're angry or not, you could optimize for educational retention, or you could optimize for political activism, where success is getting people to vote. Or you could optimize for seeing messages within your neighborhood, even if you don't know those neighbors, kind of like an area chat in an MMO. You could even allow different users to optimize for different variables. Maybe I'm on the social media platform so that I can get knowledge about this new topic, but someone else is on the social media platform so that they can see every post their relatives and their families put up there. The reason that we don't optimize for different things is simply because social media companies are profit maximizing. By definition, they almost have to optimize for more money for themselves, and they don't care about anything else, including what's actually good or healthy for the users of their products. Interestingly, I think generative AI will upset this balance a little bit. Because generative AI is very good at summarizing information and presenting it in a different way with a different slant, whatever you want to say, that means that anyone with a generative AI layer between them and the internet could browse the most toxic of social media feeds quite pleasantly. Essentially, it would let you translate a bit between different optimization functions. However, to truly apply a different optimization function, you need to change the underlying algorithm within the social media network that decides what information to show you. So you would need these new fitness functions to be implemented by the platforms themselves, which, as I already said, they have no incentive to do so. So I do wonder if other social media platforms, decentralized ones like Mastodon, might start to become more prevalent in the future. If you haven't heard of Mastodon, it was basically a clone of then Twitter, with one exception, which is that the servers that store the messages are not under the control of one company. Instead, anyone can run a Mastodon server. So they download the code for Mastodon, they pay for the server themselves or whatever, and that hosts a little social media environment for people to interact on. Usually each server has its own flavor of rules and its own focus for what type of people it wants to have on that platform. If you haven't tried Mastodon, it's kind of fun. You could check it out. Just keep in mind that you have to first find a server that kind of matches your interests, and then you join on that server. You can actually migrate profiles between servers at a later date, so the choice isn't a strong binding one. And lastly, Mastodon servers have a bit of a mechanism to exchange posts between each other. So you can be on one server but actually still see posts by someone else who's on another server if you want to. So it all works quite well. And importantly, for our purposes, each Mastodon server runs its own code and therefore can run its own algorithm. Most servers basically just use the fire hose approach, like they just show you most recent post and then next most recent post and so on. But like I said, if you wanted to optimize for some other variable, you could just write a Mastodon server, change the algorithm, and then throw it into the federated universe of all Mastodon servers. So interesting food for thought. This video would not be complete without me talking about YouTube a little bit. I harped on Facebook because they're probably the worst offender when it comes to squeezing value out of users and really not paying attention to their needs. But YouTube is also an attention-based platform. If a lot of people click on my video and then keep watching it for long periods of time, YouTube thinks this is a good piece of content, I'll show it to more and more people, with the sole purpose of trying to get people to stay on the platform longer, which again is all fine and good for educational content, but it means there's a huge scope for divisive content, politically divisive content, or just outrageous content to really shoot up and become popular. There is a New York Times article about this on YouTube, which I'll link in the description below. I think that everybody who uses social media platforms should be aware of this, should be a little bit conscious about how they spend their attention. My videos are educational, so I don't feel bad about leveraging this system to get my content in front of the eyes of more people. Like I said, it's great to be a social media platform because you can be the bedrock on which most other projects take place. But in the long run, we need much stronger protections against content that is strongly divisive. And that probably means that the pure focus on maximizing the time users spend on the platform has to change. Having a decentralized platform and or having generative AI that lets you change the optimization metric would also be two other ways of trying to achieve this goal. Remember, in the digital realm, nothing matters if we don't pay attention to it. If a tree falls in the digital forest and no human sees it, it makes no dent on our collective stories and therefore basically doesn't exist. Finally, in conclusion, all humans have a certain amount of attention, and it's actually biologically driven because our bodies don't want to spend more energy than they have to on staying alive, and thinking, conscious processing uses energy. So don't do it if you don't have to, according to the body. In a world with tons of information, attention is the real currency. Entire companies, social media platforms, have been based on this idea. Social media platforms try to maximize the amount of time you spend on the platform, maximizing your attention, in other words, because that's how they can make profit off of advertisement. The problem is, by showing you advertisements, by showing you content from certain individuals, the platform influences how you think at the same time as keeping you glued to the screen. Users become polarized, pushed to one extreme or another. And when you're in a filter bubble and you get all your information through social media, that can cause unrest and even violence in populations. In the long run, to address these issues, we probably have to change the optimization target that the social media companies are going after. As long as you keep trying to maximize time, you're going to get a lot of these negative side effects. Generative AI or decentralized networks could help address this, or perhaps regulation, or however you would actually go about convincing a social media company not to be so profit maximizing. I know, very difficult if not impossible. At a grand scale, social media polarization makes communication at the society level difficult. There will be huge schisms. Democracy is less effective. People turn to autocratic leaders to try to enforce their will over segments of population that don't agree. If you want to help address this, just spread knowledge that we are spending our attention. It's quite possible to use social media platforms in a really positive way if you understand what you're getting out of it. Maybe use different accounts for different purposes. And if you want to learn more, definitely read the book, The Chaos Machine, linked in the description. If you liked this video, I would greatly appreciate if you could check out my Patreon page and consider supporting me. For evidence of how AI will bring very positive things to the world as well, check out this previous video I made where I talk about how AI may unlock immortality for humans. Well, that's all I have for today. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.